The call came at 2:47 in the morning, and I remember the exact time because I had been staring at the ceiling for 2 hours already, listening to the rain hit the bedroom window and wondering why my husband hadn't come home yet. I let it ring, not because I didn't recognize the number, I didn't, but because something in my chest told me that whatever was on the other end of that call was going to change things. And I wasn't ready to let things change at 2:47 in the morning. It rang again. I picked up. Is this Mrs. Calloway? Fiona Calloway? I sat up in bed. Yes. Who is this? My name is Officer Tran. I'm with Chicago PD. Ma'am, your husband was involved in a minor traffic accident on West Fullerton. He's fine. No injuries, but we do need you to come down to the station. I exhaled slowly. Traffic accident. Okay, I said. I'll be there. It was only when I was pulling on my coat in the dark hallway that I noticed his keys were hanging on the hook by the door. Both sets. Marcus. That's what the officer had called him, I realized. Except my husband's name wasn't Marcus. My husband's name was Joel. I should go back a little. Joel and I had been married for 9 years when that call came. 9 years, one house in Wicker Park, 2 cats named after Jasmine musicians, and a life that looked, from the outside, like exactly what we had both said we wanted. I was a structural engineer at a mid-size firm in the Loop. Joel was a financial advisor at a wealth management company downtown. We had a joint savings account, a shared Google Calendar, standing reservations at a Thai place on Milwaukee Avenue every Friday night. We were fine. That was always the word I used. We were fine. I didn't know how much I had come to hate that word until much later. The station was quiet when I arrived. A young officer at the front desk typed something without looking up, then pointed me toward a waiting area with plastic chairs and a vending machine that hummed too loudly. I sat down. I folded my hands in my lap. I waited. 40 minutes passed before a detective came out and introduced herself as Detective Karen Osi. She was probably mid-50s, with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and an expression that told me she had done this particular kind of conversation many times before. Mrs. Calloway, she said, sitting across from me, your husband was not in a traffic accident. I stared at her. He was detained after a domestic disturbance call at an address on North Damon, a neighbor reported shouting. When officers arrived, they found your husband at the apartment of a woman named Tessa Griffiths. She paused. Ms. Griffiths confirmed that she and your husband have been in a relationship for approximately 14 months. The vending machine hummed. I heard myself say, very calmly, 14 months. Yes, ma'am. I counted backward. 14 months ago, Joel and I had gone to his holiday party together. I had worn a burgundy dress. He had told me I looked beautiful. We had danced once, badly, and laughed about it on the drive home. 14 months. He's free to go, Detective Osi said. No charges. But we wanted to make sure you knew the situation before he came home. She said it carefully, in a way that suggested she had learned at some point that this kind of information was better coming from her than from a husband with a convenient story ready. I thanked her. I don't know why. It felt like the thing to do. Joel came home 2 hours after I did. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea I hadn't touched. He walked in and stopped when he saw me. I watched something move across his face. Not guilt exactly, more like calculation. He was figuring out what I knew. Fiona, don't, I said. He sat down across from me anyway. He tried 3 different versions of the same explanation over the next 40 minutes. The first one involved a work friendship that had gotten complicated. The second one involved loneliness and distance and the fact that we had both been so busy. The third one, the one he landed on when the first 2 didn't work, involved the word mistake so many times that it started to sound like a sound effect rather than a word. I listened to all 3. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I watched his hands on the table, and I thought about the fact that I had held those hands in a hospital room when his father was dying. And I had held those hands at our friends' weddings, and I had held those hands on an airplane during turbulence because he was scared of flying and would never admit it. 14 months. I need you to leave, I said when he was finished. Fiona, please. Tonight, Joel. I need you to pack a bag and leave tonight. He left. He took his gym bag, and his laptop, and his good winter coat, and he walked out the front door at a little after 6 in the morning. And I sat there until the sun came all the way up. And the cats started yelling for their breakfast. And I had to get up and feed them, because they didn't know anything had changed. I didn't tell anyone for 4 days. I went to work. I answered emails. I reviewed load calculations for a mixed-use development in River North, and I attended a site meeting, and I ate lunch at my desk, and I drove home in the dark, and I fed the cats, and I sat in the quiet house, And I did not call my mother or my best friend, Adrian, or my sister, in Phoenix, and I did not tell anyone at all. On the fifth day, Adrian showed up at my door with 2 bottles of wine and a container of soup from the deli we had been going to since graduate school. And I understood that somehow she already knew. She had always been better at reading silence than most people were at reading words. She sat on my couch, and she didn't say anything useful or profound. She just said, "Okay, I'm here." And I started crying for the first time, and I couldn't stop for a very long time. Joel called every day for the first 2 weeks. I let most of them go to voicemail. The messages were a progression. First apologetic, then hurt, then quietly threatening in a way that was packaged to sound like concern. "You're not eating enough. You're isolating yourself. This isn't healthy, Fiona. You need to think about what you really want here." What I really wanted was to understand where 9 years had gone. I called my attorney in the 3rd week. Her name was Judith Crane, a woman in her early 60s who had been referred to me by a colleague, and who had, in her first 10 minutes with me, asked more precise and relevant questions about my marriage than anyone else had in recent memory. Joint assets, she asked, pen moving. House. Retirement accounts. The investment portfolio he manages. She looked up. He manages his own portfolio? He's a financial advisor. He handles the investments. Something shifted in her expression, just slightly. "I'm going to need full disclosure statements. Every account, every asset. Can you get me access to your joint financial records?" I could. As it turned out, that was where things started to get genuinely interesting. Our house in Wicker Park was worth somewhere between $600,000 and $650,000, depending on the market. We had bought it together 7 years ago. Both names on the deed, 30% down, which we had split from our respective savings. That much I knew. What I did not know, what I discovered when Judith's forensic accountant started pulling records, was that Joel had quietly taken out a home equity line of credit 18 months earlier, against our house. Without my knowledge or signature. I sat in Judith's office, and I read the documents she set in front of me, and I understood slowly what I was looking at. "How?" I said. "Forged signature," Judith said, in the measured tone of someone delivering a diagnosis. "It happens. And it's a serious problem for him." She set another document next to the first one. The HELOC was for $80,000. Based on the account records, the funds were withdrawn over a period of about 16 months. She paused. The withdrawals track closely with the period of the relationship. 14 months, 16 months, roughly the same span of time. Roughly the same person. He was financing the affair, I said, though it barely needed saying. "It appears that way, yes." I looked at the number on the page, $80,000. From our house. From the thing we had built together. I thought about the Friday Thai dinners, the Google Calendar, the jazz musician cats, the turbulence on airplanes. I thought, I am going to be so precise about this. Illinois is an equitable distribution state, which meant our marital assets would be divided based on fairness, not automatically split 50-50. Judith explained this carefully, and then explained what equitable tended to mean when one party had committed financial fraud against the other. It meant it was going to be very bad for Joel. He retained his own attorney, a man named Garrett something, who sent a series of letters that grew progressively less confident over a period of about 6 weeks. The forged signature on the HELOC documents was not a small problem. Joel had also, as the records continued to reveal, been running personal expenses, dinners, hotel stays, a weekend in Charleston, a piece of jewelry, through a business account in ways that were going to create difficulties far beyond our divorce proceedings. Judith used the word exposure a lot in those weeks. As in, his exposure in this situation is significant. As in, there may be exposure beyond civil proceedings. I let her do her job, and I tried to do mine. I should tell you about the day I ran into Tessa Griffiths. It was a Saturday in March, 3 months after the night of the phone call. I was at the farmer's market on Green City, the one I had been going to every other Saturday for years, and I was standing at a flower stall trying to decide between 2 bunches of tulips. And I looked up and she was there. I knew who she was. I had looked her up, once, in a single late-night moment of weakness, the kind of thing you do even when you know it won't help anything. She was 31. She worked in marketing. She had dark hair and a collection of tasteful travel photos on her Instagram, and there was nothing extraordinary about her, which was somehow the most clarifying thing of all. She recognized me too. I could tell by the way she stopped moving for a half second. We stood there, 20 feet apart, between the flower stall and the cheese vendor, And I thought about all the things I could say or do. And then I thought about the tulips in my hand, and I chose the yellow ones, paid for them, and walked to my car. I sat in the car for a few minutes after. I didn't cry. I felt something clarify. The way an image comes into focus when you adjust a lens, and I understood that I was going to be fine. Not fine the way I had been fine before, the way that was actually just a way of not looking too closely at things. Fine in a different sense. Fine in the sense of, I know what I'm worth, and I know what I'm doing, and I am going to walk out of this in one piece. The divorce was finalized in September. Judith got me the house. I had the option to sell. And Garrett's letters, toward the end, had taken on a tone of modest desperation, suggesting that surely we could reach a practical arrangement. But I chose to buy Joel out of his share at below market value, given the circumstances, and he accepted because his exposure elsewhere left him in no position to argue. He also agreed to repay the $80,000 drawn from the HELOC. That was structured as a separate settlement. Judith's forensic accountant sent his report to the IRS independently, because that's where some of the business account irregularities pointed, and that became a problem that was no longer my problem. The last time I saw Joel was in the courthouse hallway after the final hearing. He looked like he had lost weight. He looked like someone who had not been sleeping well. He looked at me for a moment before his attorney steered him toward the elevator, and I thought, I used to know everything about this person. I used to know which side of the bed he needed and what he ate when he was anxious and what his breathing sounded like when he was finally asleep, and now he is just a man in a hallway. I walked out into the September sunshine and called Adrienne and told her it was done. She said, "Drinks. Now." I said, "Absolutely. I want to tell you about Owen. I met him in October, about 6 weeks after the divorce was finalized. I was not looking to meet anyone. I want to be clear about that. I was very deliberately, consciously not looking, because I had decided I needed at least a year of being exactly and only myself before I introduced another person's gravity into the equation. Owen was a contractor. He was doing renovation work on the brownstone 2 doors down from my house in Wicker Park. The owners were updating the kitchen and one of the bathrooms. And I had been walking past the site every morning on my way to the L and every evening on my way home. And we had exchanged the kind of nods that neighbors and construction workers exchange, which is to say polite and brief and not particularly weighted. One evening in October, I came home in the rain, and I was standing on my front steps trying to find my keys in my bag. And I knocked my coffee thermos off the railing, and it bounced down 3 steps and landed on the sidewalk and rolled directly into a puddle. Owen was walking past at that exact moment, coming off the job site, and he picked up the thermos and held it out to me and said, with total seriousness, "Rough landing." I laughed. I don't know why. It wasn't that funny. But it had been a long and difficult year, and I stood on my front steps in the rain and laughed, and he laughed too, and we stood there like 2 people who had accidentally stumbled into an actual moment of something. "I'm Owen," he said. "Fiona," I said. "I know," he said. "You leave at 7:45 and get home around 6:30. You have 2 cats. You're doing something to your front hallway based on the paint samples taped to your front door." I stared at him. "I'm a contractor," he said. "I notice things." He handed me the thermos. "The color in the middle is the one you should go with." He was right. It was the warm sage green one. I had been going back and forth about it for a week. We had coffee the following Saturday. Just coffee, which turned into a 3-hour conversation at a place on Division Street that had good light and mediocre pastries. He was 42. Divorced 4 years prior. 2 kids, shared custody, alternating weekends. He had grown up in Milwaukee, moved to Chicago in his 20s, built enough of a business that he now owned the renovation company rather than working for it. He asked me questions, and then he actually listened to the answers. It's a more unusual quality than it should be. I told him about the divorce, eventually. Not all of it, and not in the way I would tell Adrienne, but enough. He listened without flinching or filling the space with reassurances, which I appreciated. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Okay, thank you for telling me." That was it, just, "Okay. Thank you for telling me." I thought, this is what it's supposed to feel like. We dated slowly. That was his word, slowly, offered on our second meeting, with a directness I found startling and then immediately appreciated. He had 2 kids and a business and a life that was already structurally complex. And I had a healing year that I still owed myself, and neither of us needed anything to move faster than it should. We had dinner. We went to the Art Institute on a Sunday afternoon. He came over and correctly identified that my kitchen faucet had a failing cartridge and fixed it in 20 minutes without making a thing about it. I met his kids, Nolan, who was 11 and obsessed with maps, and June, who was 8 and had opinions about everything, over burgers in his backyard in November, and they were funny and sharp and not at all suspicious of me, which felt like a gift. It was not a dramatic love story. I want to say that plainly. There was no grand gesture or turning point or single moment where everything shifted. There was just the steady accumulation of a person who showed up and kept showing up and was exactly who he said he was every time. By spring, I understood that I was in love with him. Not the way I had loved Joel, which I now understood had been a love that required me to look away from too many things. This was different. This was the kind that felt like solid ground. I need to tell you the part about Ren. Ren was my neighbor. She had lived across the hall. We'd shared a wall in my pre-Wicker Park apartment years ago before I met Joel. And she was one of those people who existed at the exact intersection of nosy and genuinely kind. She knew everyone on the block, kept track of everyone's packages and parking situations and relationship statuses, and was reliably the first to know anything about anything. She also knew Joel, had met him dozens of times over the years, had attended our housewarming party when we bought the Wicker Park house, had smiled and hugged me and told me how happy she was for us. About 4 months after the divorce was finalized, I was at Adrian's birthday gathering, and Ren was there. And she pulled me aside near the kitchen and said, with the particular expression of someone delivering information they feel conflicted about, "Fiona, I need to tell you something." She had run into Joel recently at a coffee shop on Clark. He was with someone, not Tessa Griffiths, someone new. And while Ren was trying to figure out whether to say anything, she overheard Joel describing his divorce to this new woman as the result of Fiona's emotional unavailability, as the result of the distance I had created, as something that had happened to him. I looked at her for a moment. How did she seem? I asked. The woman he was with. Ren thought about it. Young, she said, paying close attention to everything he said. I nodded slowly. I thought you should know, Ren said. In case he's telling that story around. He can tell whatever story he wants, I said. The court records are public. I wasn't angry. I noted that. I was not angry. I was something quieter and more settled. The feeling of someone who has already done the work of getting to the other side and has discovered that the view from there is unobstructed. Owen and I got engaged in January. He asked me on a Sunday evening in my kitchen, which I know sounds unromantic, but was not at all. We were making dinner. He was in charge of the risotto. I was in charge of the salad, which is the correct division of labor. And he said, without any preamble, I've been thinking about asking you to marry me. I stopped cutting the cucumber. Okay, I said. I don't have a ring with me right now, he said, because I wanted to talk about it first. Whether you'd want to, what it would look like, how we'd handle the house and the kids and all of it. I set down the knife. I turned around and looked at him standing there in my kitchen with a wooden spoon in his hand, and I thought about everything that had happened to get me to this exact room, this exact moment. The 247 call. The plastic chairs at the police station. The forged signature. The September courthouse hallway. The thermos bouncing down 3 steps into a puddle. Yes, I said, I want to. He smiled, the specific smile I had come to know, the one that was always slightly surprised, like he hadn't fully expected good news even when he'd asked for it. Okay, he said. I'll get the ring. Okay, I said. We finished making dinner. We got married the following October, outdoors, at a small venue north of the city where the trees were full and turning. Nolan read a poem he had chosen himself from a book about geography, which made no logical sense and made everyone cry anyway. June wore a dress with pockets and spent most of the reception explaining the pocket situation to anyone who would listen. Adrian was my maid of honor. She had already claimed the title approximately 48 hours after the divorce was finalized, before Owen existed, before any of this was possible, because she said she had a feeling and she was choosing to act on it. She was right. She usually is. I still live in the Wicker Park house. Owen moved in last spring. He identified 3 things within the first week that needed to be addressed. A slow drain, a loose banister post, something imprecise going on with the second-floor windows, and addressed all of them without me asking. The cats have accepted him, which I consider the most meaningful possible endorsement. I think about the 9 years sometimes. Not in the way I used to, which was a kind of sustained background grief that I had mistaken for ordinary life. I think about them the way you think about a place you used to live, with some fondness for what was good about it, and a clear understanding that you have moved. Joel, as far as I know, is no longer with Tessa Griffiths. He's living in a rental in Lincoln Park. The IRS matter took longer than expected to resolve and cost him significantly. I know this not because I track him, but because Wren's information network is essentially a public utility, and some things are simply in the air. I don't think about him with bitterness. I want to say that clearly, and mean it. I think about him with the distance of someone who no longer needs anything from the story to be different. He made his choices. The consequences shaped themselves around those choices in ways that had nothing to do with me. I made my choices too. I chose Judith and her forensic accountant. I chose the yellow tulips. I chose to stand in my kitchen on a Sunday evening and say yes before the ring even existed. There is a photograph from our wedding that Adrian took, unofficially, during the ceremony. Owen is saying something to me. I can't remember what now. Something small, probably, and I am laughing, and the trees behind us are orange and gold and entirely unreasonable in their beauty, and I look like someone who has arrived somewhere she intended to be. I keep it on the desk in my home office, next to a small plant I have somehow managed not to kill and a coffee mug Nolan painted for me with absolute confidence and zero technical skill. Every morning when I sit down to work, I see it, and I think, this is what came after. This was always what was waiting on the other side. The 247 call was the worst night of my life. It was also, though I couldn't have known it then, the first night of the rest of it.